Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Folani. Hope you had a great weekend, and it's Monday morning, and so to work. Well, the situation in Sudan, the fighting that's been going on in Sudan that has made everyone's life there a misery, all efforts to, have talks that would sort of lead to something of a breakthrough. So far, we hear that those talks haven't yielded much fruit. So we thought we'd look today at the situation in Sudan and the growing humanitarian crisis that the world is facing, especially those that are in Sudan, and especially those that are sort of like expatriates in Sudan. Nigeria is among that number. Happily, we began to get some of our people back. But it still is a harrowing story. Now, to talk with us this morning about this subject matter, we have Professor Babafemi A. Badejo, an ex-staff of the UN mission in Darfur, Sudan. A fine morning to you, Prof.
Yes, very good morning to you too.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for making time for us. And we also have in our Lagos studio Dr. Dan Ekere. He's a lecturer in the philosophy department of the University of Lagos, but I didn't need to tell you that he's such a frequent guest on our program that you knew that already. Good morning to you, Dr. Kere.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
Again, our pleasure. We're smiling now, but it's a harrowing situation that's been going on in Sudan. And let me take it first to Prof, especially Prof having been in the UN mission in Darfur, Sudan. This we know it's a harrowing story. We hear pictures, but it's probably really a bit more than harrowing. It's a matter of life or death to those that are in there. Your overview, sir, of the dire situation that we are in now, that the world is in now, in Sudan.
Well, it is extremely a dire situation for many people. The Sudanese, principally, given the fact that they are in their country and very few of them are able to have the alternatives that are being offered to foreigners in Sudan. Of course, there are foreigners that have sizable population in there. You must have been listening to the fact of the arrangements being made to evacuate Yemenis and Syrians from Port Sudan to Saudi Arabia. These were people who fled from the crisis in their respective countries, and because the Sudanese were very welcoming, especially to these Arabs, they have them in quite a sizable number, and they are being evacuated. In our situation, quite a number of our students, especially from the northern part of Nigeria, where there has been a pre-independence relationship that is very deep with the Sudan, are going to study in the universities in Sudan, and they are the ones that are being evacuated now. I don't know how many as at today, but the figure is approaching 1,000, but maybe many more. In a war situation, you are not sure if you're going to live or die because people are throwing bombs as they like. The combatants are wild, and they do whatever they like with people in terms of seizing their products, and people tend to hide in their houses. No electricity, no water. I was asking one of my colleagues, a Sudanese, to watch this program, and he responded with, what a great topic that has been chosen, but we have no light to watch it.
Oh dear.
It was insensitive on my part to even have not remembered that in this kind of a situation, who's going to be generating electricity when you don't know if you will die or leave from going to work and coming back. Then medicine. There are people who can no longer go to the hospitals. There are doctors who dared not go out and show that they are doctors because they will be conscripted immediately by either side of the combatants to come and take care of their own wounded. And medicine becoming scarce in terms of availability. These are several humanitarian problems that the world is facing, but it's not going to be limited to Sudan if we wait for too long. It's going to affect Nigeria. It's going to affect South Sudan. It's going to affect Ethiopia. It's going to affect Egypt. It's going to affect many of those neighbors. And if Libya went as far as Mali in terms of the destabilization that took place in Libya, you should be rest assured that this is not going to end, given the long relationship that we have with Sudan. The humanitarian situation, when it's very, very dire for the Lake Chad region, will spill off into several other problems, conflictual also, humanitarian, that we will have to deal with, either in terms of the movement of weapons or whatever. So there is a need to have a holistic look at the humanitarian situation.
Well, thank you very much, Prof, for that opening bird's eye view of the dire situation. And Danekere in studio, as we've just heard, Sudan is a center of learning, long been so, especially on the Islamic side of town. So long have our nationals been going there in the quest for learning. Now, Prof also hinted at this situation is in Sudan. North Sudan is a totally, they're sort of okay now. But people say, what is going on in Sudan? Is it a civil war? Well, one can't call it a civil war. I don't know. There's the National Army, and then there's the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, and these people are fighting, and it's become so as dangerous as Prof just painted out. Talk a bit, if you will, around that whole matter of the National Army in conflict with the Rapid Support Forces leading to all of this crisis.
Thank you. The situation in Sudan is indeed very worrisome, I must confess. Very worrisome.
And could spread.
Not could spread. It's already spreading. Look at the people you are moving. When you talk about evacuating people from Sudan and the rest of it, you could see the stress the various countries that are evacuating their citizens are going through. How much has been spent on evacuation? We understood that just to hire a bus, well, in the case of Nigeria, will cost how many thousands of dollars? And that alone, no Nigerian earns as much as $30,000 as a minimum wage. So if beyond the minimum wage is being used to just hire a bus, and the people who are being moved are going to be cared for and all of that, and it's not just one bus, then the risk involved as well. So many things are involved. So to say that it has not spread would be, just trying to be mild with words, because already it's affecting them. Apart from that, like Prof rightly said, there's going to be huge humanitarian crisis.
Yes.
Very huge. You see, the way this thing is going, I've listened to a lot of speakers talking about the need for African Union and even Nigeria in particular to rise to the occasion to provide leadership and the rest of it. It is really critical, because it's like saying that you see an old plantain leaf falling and the grain is celebrating. That is not my tongue. You get it?
Yes.
That's the way this thing is. It is Sudan. But the effect will spread so wide. It's going to affect almost the entire continent of Africa. And that is the more reason why we need to wake up now. The need is no longer going to be proactive because lives are being wasted. And now the challenge is those who are fighting, whose interests are they protecting?
That's a very confusing issue.
Whose interest? Some are saying, okay, one is a national army, the other one is a rebel group. National to what extent? How national is this army? How national is that group? To what extent have they been able to show that indeed they are of national interest? So what interest is the other one fighting to protect? So you can see that the failure of leadership has been a major challenge. And it's not just in Sudan. This is a very serious matter in Africa. Because we copy all manner of models of, politics, governance, and all the rest, things that we are not rooted in, things that we are not properly trained to do, and we just jump into them. At the end of the day, what comes out is that we become more self-serving than ever before. And at the end of the day, some others will want to come in to see how they can as well protect their interests. But today, two groups are fighting. If you ask those soldiers but it's normal with soldiers, where by their training, all you do is give instructions and they go. Otherwise, if you ask, what exactly are you fighting for? I'm sure there are a lot of them who will tell you they don't even know what they are doing.
Exactly.
Yes, because at the end of it all, somebody is just pushing some persons to fight, to kill, just to protect an interest. Just so at the end of it, you will see that some will be smiling to the banks at the cost of lives. And I think that is really very unfortunate. So Africans need to rise, particularly the African Union, Nigeria too. We need to provide that leadership to show, because at the end of the day, already our students are coming back.
Exactly.
And I heard Bike Dabiri saying that we have up to 3 million to how many Nigerians there. The one we are talking about, they are just students. There are other Nigerians who are there.
Who
how
are not
Nigerians,
students.
yes,
Yes.
who are into businesses and all the rest. You know how Nigerians move. So I would be surprised if some are already casualties. So we really need to do something. How do we value lives in Africa? Of what value is life to African leadership, whatever? It's really challenging.
Okay. Prof, there are those who are looking at the crisis in Sudan as something of a failure of leadership. Even in the few minutes of this program, we've mentioned the African Union, we've mentioned we've mentioned Nigeria, for its place in especially in the West African sub-region. So how would one explain it very, very simply if there's the army there, call them the National Army, and they're being taken on by a rapid support force? I don't know if we are to call that the rebel group. So what actually is the bone of contention, if it is at all clear enough to express simply?
Well, I have been suggesting for a while now a comprehensive way of trying to make a clarity of political situation anywhere. And that is to look at governance, and governance involves analyzing the leadership and the level of corruption, then to look at external dynamics that are in contention in the particular country you are trying to analyze, to look at the nature of institution building, because individuals end up acting through institutions, and to look at availability of resources. Okay. Those things are the situational foundations for other things like peace and security, development, human rights, respect for it, humanitarianism, in terms of being able to survive in that situation. When you take a totality of this, then you might be able to make a sense of what was happening in Sudan. The leadership deficit in Sudan is very clear. Omar al-Bashir was in charge for decades. And Omar al-Bashir, when he was feeling that he could no longer totally rely on the armed forces, he created what he called the Rapid Support Forces. But the Rapid Support Forces were, at the beginning, the Arabs that were on horseback that were called Janjaweed. And he put them under Hemeti, got them well trained by people like Al-Burhan, working with Hemeti. And you then had a bifurcated military force. It's not correct to be talking about National Army and a rebel group. No, Rapid Support Forces is not a rebel group. It was created and empowered to be a fallback position if the military were to try to overthrow Omar al-Bashir. But the people went on the road and the people clamored for their freedom. And during that period, it became very clear that Omar al-Bashir was no longer sustainable. As a result of that, the Hemeti, who was heading the Rapid Support Forces, and the army side reached an agreement that it was time for Omar al-Bashir to go, and al-Burhan would be the head of the setup, and Hemeti, General Dagalo, the head of Rapid Support Forces, will be number 2. And of course, conceded an initial position to a civilian, a friend and colleague that was taken from the United Nations to become the Prime Minister of Sudan. Of course, he was also overthrown and it became largely a military affair when it was clear that the military were not going. So you then had 2 leaders in contention, both having formidable forces, and those forces being reinforced by external interests. That may surprise you. And some of those external interests are even now talking about negotiating peace for them, which is a ruse. But okay, let's leave that for now. But so when you look at the totality of what's ongoing, then you know that you are facing state collapse if care is not taken. And when you have state collapse, it stops being, go and bring me your leader, because there are several leaders popping up, several warlords taking charge of different portions, and the command structure is already broken into 2. So you don't have a single army that's able to deal with a rebel force. So we need to put some of this in perspective in understanding what we are facing. Yes, you have been talking about African Union and what Nigeria.
The role of Nigeria.
Do the parties care about African Union and IGAD?
Wow.
What respect do they have for IGAD and the African Union? So those are the issues that we first, and I don't think if I can answer my question, I don't think they really care about whatever is happening with a set of poor countries. They look down on South Sudan all along before South Sudan got its independence, and we are now expecting that all of a sudden they will go to Juba and have peace. And of course, that broke down in spite of the effort, because it's not for not trying. IGAD put together President Omar Gele of Djibouti, as well as Salva Kiir, as well as the president of Kenya, William Ruto, for the 3 of them to go talk sense to these people. But they don't give a damn about these Africans coming to solve a problem between them. How much money do those ones have? How much clout worldwide do those ones have to make a difference in ensuring that they talk seriously? And even those who have clout, what are their interests?
Yes.
Is their interest to allow the situation to remain as it is? The last, currently they are in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to talk about humanitarian ceasefire, not political ceasefire, not political agreement, humanitarian, to allow those who are in trouble in different parts of the country to be able to move and some aid to come in. Of course, it is possible that you can go forward from that to a political ceasefire that leads to further negotiation. I hope that that can be achieved, but I'm not optimistic given the parties, both the internal parties, the external parties who are appearing to be wanting to help realize peace. And in a way, it's never possible for them to speak with one voice. African Union is irrelevant in all this.
Oh dear.
African Union hasn't even had its Peace and Security Council in trying to deal with. And what leverage is African Union having? What leverage is anybody even having? Because you threaten them that you are going to put them under sanctions. But Sudan has been eternally under sanctions since the time of Omar al-Bashir. And they didn't move. They did whatever they wanted to do, supported by their different external forces. So we hope that there can be some breakthrough, but as I said, I am not optimistic.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Dan, Professor paints a very bleak picture when all the facts are lined up. When you have a situation where the principal players, one, don't really care, just like Prof has so very clearly explained, looking down on those purporting to want to intervene, and that's on the one hand. And then there are external parties to this. And as Prof has again explained, and I'm sure you know, you have to be very doubtful of, well, let me not say doubtful, at least you have to be looking very keenly to determine what exactly are the motives here.
The interest is
Yes.
critical.
So when we have that situation, there's the African Union, Prof just wiped it away, said as far as they are concerned over there, he would be very surprised if they have any relevancy whatsoever. And then there's also Nigeria. So he spoke about leverage. Who would have leverage, in your estimation, in a situation like this that they would have to listen to?
Well, it's really very doubtful if there's any that we can talk about that will have that leverage that they will listen to. Essentially, consider the fact that they are not just doing this on their own. The external factors are actually very germane to this particular situation. You know, a number of times you find out that a lot of the crises we experience in Africa are actually motivated, you know, and perhaps sponsored from the outside.
Yes.
You know, because of the kind of interest they have in Africa. Unfortunately, they will always find a ready market for that because the way and manner we run our affairs gives a lot of room for such things to thrive. That is why you find those forces coming surreptitiously, penetrating in a manner that either we understand or we pretend not to understand or whichever, and they go so deep to the extent of causing this kind of level of damage. So in terms of who has a leverage that these people will be able, I doubt if there's any, but then it's not enough to say we should not make efforts because efforts have to be made.
Yes.
If efforts were made to the extent of saying that let there be some level of ceasefire for
humanitarian purposes, so that people can be...
That might just create the leeway for people to begin to approach the issue of, you know, ceasefire politically as well. You know, but again, when you look at almost all the African countries, which one is actually well governed that does not have issues of this kind? Because the one who is not in power, that is accusing the one in power as being corrupt, a thief, is only a thief in the waiting, you know, for an opportunity to do the same. And almost everything is the same. So for you to now, it's like a kettle calling a pot black, you know. When you come and say, okay, this thing, you should get to this level, and they look at where you are coming from, the same questions are there. They'll be wondering why not take time to actually take care of yourself before think about the others. But what is critical now is that there are other nationals that are in Sudan. And that one is very important because that alone can create even a greater, you know, chaotic situation. And that is the more reason why they have to listen. And that is the more reason why the rest of Africa have to stand up to the occasion.
Yes.
We must rise up to the occasion and see how we can address this challenge. See how we can bring them to, you know, a round table, have a discussion. Obviously, it's always a give and take arrangement because That's why I was asking you which one is national, which one is a rebel group. Because at the end of the day, even if one has actually risen as a rebel group, are they foreigners? They have an interest. They have a stake.
And when we're talking about interest here,
yes.
America, I don't know how the extent to which America is involved in all of this, but
Yes.
as you know, America likes to see itself as the policeman of the world from
Yes.
time to time.
Yes.
And then there's Putin's Russia, just waiting and watching everything very, very carefully. And he's always going to be a counterbalance.
At some time, the challenge you have with the police is that the police will be the one setting up the crisis and only to come in. So it becomes very challenging.
This is it.
Who is actually policing what now in this case? Because they all have their interests. They won't go into any arena of this kind for your own sake. It's always for their own interest. So whatever they will do, either for ceasefire or to even fuel the situation the more, it's always about their interest. Interest is critical. This time around, the two groups that are fighting, whose interests are they fighting to protect?
Well,
are they from foreign land? They are all from the same Sudan.
I think
So that is why it will even be easier to strike a chord and say, okay, we are, look at it. This situation of democracy we'll keep talking about, where somebody will emerge out of maybe 100%, you get 55%, and you consider the 45 useless, will always create problem for us. You see, there are people who have the temperament to stomach such things, who can work with it. But a scenario where you just import things and think that it will work for every environment is really something that we need to interrogate seriously. We need to look at it. That is why all interests must be taken care of. Nobody is more Sudanese than the other. None. And interestingly, it was the former president that created the one that is now seen to be more like a rebel group or something. Mm-hmm. And the other was already a standing army that was there, out of which you created this and trained and empowered them. So they are all empowered. So they have capacity to unleash values, and that's what we are saying today. What is now critical is how to harness these energies and see how we can manage in a manner that will be profitable to the state and to the rest of the African continent. I think that's just where we need to.
Because it's a very complex issue.
Indeed, it is.
In between what you said and the background that Prof gave,
yes.
And the South Sudan has always been looked down upon. Now they've gone their way, and they're facing up to whatever it is.
And this thing is equally going to spiral. The effect will surely they can't run away from it. They just cannot run. Even the humanitarian crisis alone is a huge challenge.
Exactly,
it's a huge challenge, and all the surrounding countries are going to suffer it. If the other time our own president Muhammadu Buhari made was that an allegation or what? That a lot of the crises we are having, the attacks, it was actually from Libya, a spillover of Libya's situation. If all the way from Libya will be suffering it here, how do you imagine the surrounding states to Sudan? So it's a very, I'm telling you,
it's a very, very serious situation, and as a prof has also explained, it's complex. There are interests at play here, external interests, and then in Sudan, they do things differently. Maybe our worldview is such as it is. We are coming from the colonial era, the British and all of that. I don't know the extent to which they imbibed any of that. They're mostly, I would guess, they're mostly Islamic. It's mostly an Islamic nation. So I imagine that the whole narration might well be different, Prof. Is that indeed the case? Very briefly, before we go on break, is that part of the complication of the issue that worldviews differ?
I think the problem is much more complex than yes, a sizable portion of the country is Arab. Is Islamic. But we must understand that this was a territory that was totally part of the Egypt at some point, part of British colonialism at some point. The independence of Sudan came out of the British granting it The problem is complex.
All right. You know what, Prof? I beg your pardon. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Prof. The problem is complex, and so you just had a few seconds. What I'm going to do, sir, is take a break, come back, and so you can continue on the complexity of the situation the world is facing in Sudan. So please stay with us. We'll be right back.